All right, well, hello, good evening and afternoon, everyone. I'm Tosca Lee, and I'm one of the Rogue Women Writers. We are a group of 9 thriller writers whose backgrounds range from intelligence officer to journalist to crime scene analyst to special investigator, hostage negotiator, psychotherapist to international consultants to White House strategists. A quick orientation. There's a chat room on the side of the screen. So if you click on the chat icon, both participants and special guests, please feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself with a quick comment in that chat bar. We'd love to know where you're joining us from. And for those of you joining us on Facebook Live, please be sure to say hello and leave a comment if you have anything you'd like to tell the authors, and especially if you have a question that you'd like to ask. We will do our best to try to accommodate them all, especially towards the end of the program. And we are in for a treat, as the authors tonight will be reading from their newest work, sharing a few of their favorite treats or their characters' favorite treats, and maybe even a few behind-the-scenes secrets. All of the books discussed here tonight should be available to buy or pre-order through your local bookstore. So please be sure to grab or order a copy, support your local booksellers, and also check out our guests' previous work, which should supply you with a lot of writing and books to choose from. So let's all use the hashtags #RogueReads and #RogueWomenWriters as we post about our experiences with these authors and their works tonight. Also, you can go rogue with us. Once a month, you can receive news and more before anyone else, and you can just sign up for our free monthly newsletter at roguewomenwriters.com. So you can do that and hear from us and get our lineup for each Rogue Reads that we do. Tonight we have a quadruple giveaway, and I'm so excited. We are giving away copies of The Oligarch's Daughter by Joseph FINDER, The Lost House by Melissa Larsen, Dead Money by JAKOB KERR, and A Killer's Code by Isabella Maldonado. Winners are chosen from our registered attendees and will be notified a few days after our event via email, so please be sure to keep your eyes on your inboxes. As I said, my name is Tosca Lee. I'm an author of 12 novels, most recently The Long March Home. I hope you'll be sure to check that one out if you haven't. And I'm coming to you tonight from Nebraska. And I'm so thrilled to be emceeing this event with these authors. So I'm now going to introduce our 4 authors, and as I do, please feel free to post your questions at any time, and we will collect those and get to as many as we can. So let's get to it. First off, Joseph FINDER is the New York Times bestselling author of, I think it's 19 now. Is that correct, Joe?
No, it's actually 17.
It's 17. Okay.
Yeah.
17. Okay. So what I had was correct. 17 suspense novels, and his books have won numerous awards, including the Strand Critics Award, International Thriller Writers' Best Novel, and the Barry. 2 of his novels have been made into major motion pictures. You may have seen them, including High Crimes and Paranoia. He is a founding member of the International Thriller Writers, as well as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the Association of Former Intelligence Officers. Joe's a graduate of Yale and the Harvard Russian Research Center, and he lives in Boston. His newest book, The Oligarch's Daughter, releases January 28th, and there's a bright, shiny quote by none other than, I don't know if you can see that, Stephen King on the cover. And King says, "Any new novel by Joseph FINDER is a ticket to reading pleasure, and this one is hands down his best ever." Quote by the King. So, Joseph, will you please tell us about your latest?
Sure. So The Oligarch's Daughter is about a guy, an American guy, who meets and falls in love with a photographer in New York, an attractive woman who he only learns late is the daughter of a Russian oligarch. And as soon as he becomes involved with her, the FBI comes calling, and wants him to start informing on his father-in-law, a billionaire Russian oligarch named Arkady Galkin. And of course, our hero does not want to do that. And the FBI has got ways of making you squeal. And it sort of takes off from there.
Okay. How long did this book take to write?
It took about a little over 2 years, which is longer than most of my books. Most of my books I'm able to do in about a year. This one involved a lot of research, Russian stuff, wilderness stuff, a number of things that I had to sort of really dig into to try to make it feel as real as possible. So it took me some time.
And where did the idea come from?
Well, that's tough to figure out, really. And Tosca, I'm about to set off on my book tour, and I need to have that answer figured out.
Yes, you do.
And I'll
And
tell
I
you,
noticed there's no Nebraska stops on the tour.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. All right. Anyway, so I was noticing the prevalence of these Russian oligarchs in the U.S., these sort of merchant kings, merchant princes, you might call them. And at the same time, as we were encountering sort of increasing hostility between Russia and the U.S., and I sort of wondered what that would be like. I talked to someone who was who had a friend who started going out with the daughter of a Russian oligarch, and who told me that the security guys were with him at every turn. And I thought, that cannot be easy. And what if you're married to someone like that? What could that involve? So these sort of vague ideas like this sort of came together to form the Oligarch's Daughter.
Thank you for that. Well, I think that's a pretty good explanation. I think you did pretty well there.
Okay, good. I'll try to get it faster and get it down for my tour.
Well, we are glad to be the guinea pig on that. So,
Thank
Joe, would you read to us a little bit?
Sure. All right, this is a scene from early on in the book. Our hero's name is Grant, and he is captaining a boat. And his passenger, his only passenger, is a guy named Newman. Newman was studying him. "You know, you look familiar," he said, setting the spear gun down on the deck. "You always had a beard?" "Oh, yeah," Grant said, attempting to sound casual, but his heart was drumming. "Long before it was cool." He was pretty sure now that Newman's very slight accent was Slavic. An eel of unease squirmed in Grant's belly. It had been years since he'd heard a Russian accent. Newman's fluent English had the flat American A's of an emigre who'd spent most of his adolescence in the United States. Probably came to the U.S. as a teenager. Frederick Newman shook his head. He was speaking to Grant in a low voice, but Grant could barely hear him over the thrum and whine of the boat's engine. "Excuse me," Grant said. Newman raised his voice. "You must have known this day would come, Paul," he said calmly. Grant's stomach caved in on itself. He was looking at Newman's face, at the eyes behind those aviators. They were intent, alert, almost the eyes of someone playing a video game, neither cruel nor kind. Grant expected that tick to return, but Newman's face was absolutely placid. "I'm afraid you've got the wrong person, Mr. Newman. I'm Grant Anderson. You know, Paul, everyone dies one day. With me, it's different. Clean, quick, no suffering." Grant caught the quick flash of gunmetal, the man's right hand. Something had taken hold of Grant, something icy and willful and deliberate. His heart was racing, and he felt the first prickles of sweat on the nape of his neck. He didn't know what to do. "You'll need to pilot the boat out another 7 miles or so," Newman said. "So we're catching the Labrador Current. Best to have no body washing ashore." "But you're making a mistake," Grant said. With a calm, slow motion, he took out his wallet and drew close to Newman. "I told you, you have the wrong man. Here, let me show you my captain's license." He opened his wallet to his driver's license and displayed it, holding it too close to Newman's face. He had no captain's license. "See, you've got me confused with someone else." I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to you, Joe, and ask you some more questions, but for the moment, we're going to move on to Melissa Larsen. Melissa Larsen grew up in the Bay Area in a family of writers, believing she was the weird one for not writing. That didn't last long. Her debut novel, Shutter, was published in June 2021 by Berkeley, an imprint of Penguin Random House. It has been featured in the New York Times Book Review and named a most anticipated novel by Pop Sugar, Bustle, BuzzFeed, and Crime Reads. Melissa received her MFA from Columbia University and her BA from New York University. When she isn't traveling somewhere to research her next novel and somehow hurting herself in the process, and I think there's a story there, she lives in New York City and teaches creative writing. Melissa's newest book is The Lost House, releasing January 14th. That's tomorrow. Woohoo! Tomorrow. And about The Lost House, Kirkus Review says, with its measured pace, psychological depth, and vivid portraits of people and places, Larsen's atmospheric thriller resembles Nordic noir, a haunting whodunit with effective undertones of menace. Good words. Okay, Melissa, please tell us about The Lost House.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me here. So The Lost House, the idea is 40 years ago, this in a small town in the north of Iceland, this young mother and her infant were found murdered in the snow. There were no arrests, no convictions, but everyone in the town believed it was the husband. And when he ran away, they were like, yes, this was him. Now in the present day, there's a true crime podcast series being made about the murders, and the granddaughter of the supposed murderer has come back to town to say her piece to explain why her grandfather is innocent. But just as she arrives, a young woman from town has gone missing. So there's something afoot.
There's something afoot. Okay, and where did the idea for The Lost House come from?
So I was in Iceland. I was actually in Iceland for a winter, and I was thinking about all of these different story ideas, but I got really consumed by this one question of what if the world thought that the person who raised you, the person you loved most, was a monster? Like, what if they were a murderer? What would that do to you? What kind of life would you lead? And what if you were the only one who believed they were innocent?
Okay, thank you. Well, Melissa, will you read to us now?
Yes. So I'll read to you from the prologue. I have to abridge it a little bit so I don't go over time. I don't want to eat into anyone else's time. But all right. I hope I haunt you. Elsa can feel the beat of the music pulsing in her skeleton, but she can't hear it. She can feel Lilia's hot breath on the back of her neck, undoubtedly complaining about something, anything to get Elsa's attention back on her, but she can't decipher it. The vodka burns a messy path down her throat, and she doesn't know how many she's had, but she can't bring herself to care. There is no party. There is only the high-pitched internal scream that whistles in her ears every time she thinks about him and the words on the screen in her hand. Her fingers hurt from clutching the phone for so long. I hope I haunt you. All it takes is a tap, and she'll have sent it. She'll never have to see him again. She can't do it. What's wrong? Lilia shouting in her ear. Elsa clicks the button to kill her screen. Lilia will look. She'll search for a gap in Elsa's concentration. She can't let things rest. Sometimes Elsa thinks Lilia can smell the secrets on her. Okay, she hurts Lilia's feelings and she runs out of the party into the snow. She nudges the plywood aside from the back door, prepares to throw her body into it to get it free, but the door swings smoothly on its hinges. She slips outside, pulling the door shut behind her. She takes a sharp breath, hoping the frigid air will sober her up. Usually it helps, but tonight there's no feeling, as though she's walked into a vacuum. There's no light either. The scant illumination from the lanterns and flashlights inside is nothing against the plywood tacked to the windows. All that's left is a thin line of white leaking through the cracks. The rush of the river, so close, sucks the remaining air from Elsa's lungs. With trembling fingers, she slips her phone from her jacket pocket. There's the message, still waiting to be sent. She's already said so much, but she wants these to be the last words. She wants him to understand. She wants to hurt him the way he's hurt her. I hope I haunt you. She's sick of thinking about it, and staring down at the bright screen is making her feel actually sick. She presses send. The relief doesn't come. Elsa shoves the phone back into her pocket and steps forward into the night. She'll go home and sleep this off. It will be better in the morning when she wakes up new and free and probably so hungover she'll want to die, but at least she'll be alone. She aims for the trees, for Oscar's car somewhere beyond, but her legs won't cooperate. She can't find her balance. Her feet sink strangely into the fresh snow, sliding sideways or backward, so that she can't trust each footstep. That last drink, those last drinks, had been a mistake. She can see it now. Inside, with all the chaos, the unsteadiness had felt normal, expected. Everything she has done recently has been a mistake. Her fingers touch the cold snow, and there's pressure in the back of her eyes. When did she fall over? Acid fills her throat, but she swallows it down. If she starts vomiting now, she won't stop. The world writes itself in slow, blurry stages. She has to get to the car. Oscar left the keys in the cup holder. She'll sit in there, take a minute, warm up with the heater. She can wait for him or Lilia to follow her out. Either one of them can drive her back. She's in the trees, making her way by feel more than sight, the noise of the party a distant murmur behind her. Here, the quiet throbs against her ears, the snow muffling even the harsh quality of her breathing, which is why she doesn't hear it at first. A voice, soft. She thinks it's her own voice at first. She's whimpering under her breath. But the sound comes again, and it's not her, not her own blurry whisper telling her to move. It's a man's voice, calling her name. She walks faster, brushing her hands against the rough bark of the tree trunks as she goes. The voice presses closer, louder. What are you doing, Elsa? There's a catch in her body, hurtling her forward. She's aware of sitting, of both hands freezing in the snow. She doesn't know how long she's been like this. She drank too much tonight. This isn't what she's used to. This is something beyond her body. She's hovering outside of herself, but there's no thought in the outside. Only the trees spinning around her and the vague sense of anger, but even that is draining away. She looks up into a beam of light. There are hands in her armpits, hoisting her back up to standing. She feels safe because someone who cares about her is here to help her, but there's the whistling again. High-pitched and shrill, a tea kettle screaming on the stove. She wonders if he can hear it too. I might have gone over time. Sorry about
don't
that.
worry about it.
Ooh.
It's compelling, and we wanted to get to the end, so thank you for that.
And
I
this is
have a
also my
question.
first event.
Yes, this is your first event,
Yes,
and it
this is
comes
the
out
start of the
tomorrow in
tour.
a matter of
Yeah.
hours. So, all right, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, I have more questions, but I'm going to move on and I'm going to circle back. So I will be back. All right, now, Jakob Kerr. In addition to his work as an author, Jakob is a lawyer and communications executive in San Francisco's tech industry. He was one of the first, I'm so sorry. He was one of the first employees at Airbnb and spent a decade shepherding the company from tiny startup to global phenomenon. Jakob has also been a bartender, sports writer, and for one disastrous afternoon, the driver of an ice cream truck, and I cannot wait to hear this story. After 15 years in San Francisco, he recently returned to his native Pacific Northwest, where he now lives with his wife and children. Dead Money is his first novel, and it releases January 28th, and Blake Crouch, who I'm a big fan of, who is the author of Dark Matter, has this to say about it. A stone-cold banger of a novel, a twisty journey through Silicon Valley's dark side, wrapped in a stunning mystery package with some wild surprises along the way. Wow. Words to kill for. All right, Jacob,
Thank
please
you.
tell us, congratulations, and please tell us about Dead Money.
Thank you. And actually, there's also a quote from one Joseph Finder as well,
Woo!
which thank you, Joe, very much. Um,
Your book.
but yeah, Dead Money is my debut novel. It is a mystery thriller set in the tech world. Um, the hotshot founder of a big buzzy startup gets murdered in his office, and he leaves behind billions of dollars in dead money that's frozen in his will until his killer is found. My main character is a fixer for a venture capitalist, and her boss assigns her to this super high profile murder investigation, tells her to go solve it so that he can unlock the dead money and get control of the company. The story has a lot of twists. Everybody has their own agenda, including the main character, Mackenzie, and that's Dead Money.
All right. Tell us where the idea for Dead Money came from.
Yeah, the idea came from all the time that I spent in the tech industry. I've been in the industry for a long time. Uh, like my main character, Mackenzie, I have spent my career in tech, but I have never felt wholly of tech, kind of an insider outsider. Um, my viewpoint is that outside of royalty, no group of people in human history has been treated better than the average tech employee. And my wife has worked in hospitals for her whole career, and we would trade stories at the end of every workday, and it just reinforced how ridiculous and kind of over the top my work life was. I think fortunately I was always able to kind of maintain a perspective on that, and used it as a sort of setting for this kind of larger than life thriller story.
All right. Well, Jacob, will you read to us?
Sure. This is the this isn't the prologue, but it's the opening chapter where we meet our main character, Mackenzie. In Mackenzie Clyde's experience, there were exactly two ways of dealing with a rich asshole. The first method was universal. It applied across the full spectrum of the rich asshole genus: CEOs, athletes, actors and influencers, micro-dick hedge funders, God-complex surgeons, trust-funded Ivy Leaguers. Flattery. The key Mackenzie knew was subtlety. You had to flatter the asshole without them realizing they were being flattered. Only total idiots enjoy being pandered to. Flattery of any kind didn't come easily to Mackenzie, but out of professional necessity, she developed it as a weapon in her arsenal. The second method of dealing with a rich asshole was far from universal. It was a carefully tailored technique that Mackenzie had developed out of geographic as well as professional necessity. Mackenzie found it uniquely suited to a very particular strain of rich asshole, the young, entitled, uber-wealthy tech bros of modern San Francisco. It was this second method that Mackenzie reflected on as she followed a hostess across the shiny wooden floor of the Battery. The Battery was a private social club in San Francisco, archetypal for the tech industry. Expensive, exclusive, and utterly lacking in self-awareness. Mackenzie loathed it. She took long strides into the Battery's bar area, an oozy space stuffed with polished concrete and reclaimed wood. The booths all tufted leather Chesterfields. She ignored the eyes that flitted in her direction. Most of them, she knew, were compelled by simple anomaly, the instinctive curiosity that comes from something incongruous to the typical environment. Not that it made the stares any more welcome, but after several decades, she'd learned to live with them. Mackenzie was a very tall woman. Kevin Ryder waited in a corner booth, staring at his phone. The hostess pointed him out and slunk away, leaving Mackenzie solo for her approach. "Hello, Kevin." Kevin looked up, squinting with confusion. "Who are you?" "Mackenzie Clyde." Kevin blinked at her. "You're very tall." "Taller than you." Mackenzie tossed her bag into the empty side of the booth. She plopped down next to it. Kevin frowned. "I'm supposed to meet Rebecca." Mackenzie settled into her seat. "Rebecca's not coming." "What do you mean she's not coming?" "They sent me instead." "Does Rebecca know about this?" "Yep." "So you work with her at Hammersmith Venture?" "I do." Kevin's eyes narrowed. "Are you a partner?" Mackenzie tilted her head to one side. "Not exactly." "Another lawyer, then." Kevin shook his head. "I've told you guys a million times. I didn't go with HV so I could get legal shoved down my throat." "I'm not a lawyer," Mackenzie paused. "Well, not really." Kevin sniffed. "Look, I don't do surprises. Check your email, Mackenzie said. You'll have something from Roger. Kevin hesitated at the name. He sent me, Mackenzie said, waving a hand. The email explains. Kevin opened his phone while Mackenzie glanced at the menu. A server approached in a uniform. It had suspenders. Drinks? Manhattan, Kevin spoke, eyes still on his phone. The Dunaway, up. Rocks glass, light vermouth. Keep the twist on the rim. Don't let it touch the Dunaway. Very good. The server turned to Mackenzie. And for you? She handed him the menu. Glass of white. Any preferences? Anything that doesn't come in a box. The server smiled and glided away. Kevin finished with his phone. Roger says you're taking this off Rebecca's desk. I am. But that's all he says. He didn't give a reason. Mackenzie shrugged. Roger's not big on explaining himself. Kevin shifted in his seat, scowling. He wore a tight black V-neck, the type that comes free with a CrossFit membership. Mackenzie didn't recognize the logo on the chest pocket, an arrow pointing up and to the right, bisected by another half line of equal width. Why are you replacing Rebecca? I worked with her for months. Yeah, Mackenzie replied, that's a problem. What is? It's been months. 3 of them to be exact, and this lawsuit still hasn't been resolved. Kevin bristled. That's not my fault. No? Fuck no. Kevin's brow fell. Go talk to my neighbors. They're the problem here. Kevin Ryder was a prototypical Peter Pan, an overgrown man-child set loose in the consequence-free playground of San Francisco. He was the founder of a fintech company that just closed its Series B, making him worth a few $100 million on paper. Kevin was also emblematic of the latest iteration of tech bro, one that fused the new age faux optimism of Silicon Valley with the unapologetic old money privilege of Wall Street. 10 years prior, Kevin would have been safely ensconced in the buffoonery of an investment bank. But now the capital had moved west, and the money hounds like Kevin had followed the scent, tails wagging behind them. Hammersmith Venture, Mackenzie's firm, had invested $72 million into Kevin Ryder's company. Roger Hammersmith, Mackenzie's boss, had personally overseen the investment. And because the gravitational laws of corporate physics require that shit always slides downhill, Mackenzie now found herself at the Battery, tasked with talking reality into a man who'd grown accustomed to creating his own. I'll stop there.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to come back. I have questions, especially about the ice cream thing. And so I will be back. But next, we are moving on to our very own Rogue Women Writers Rogue, Isabella Maldonado. Isabella wore a gun and badge in real life before turning to crime writing. A graduate of the FBI National Academy in Quantico and the first Latina to attain the rank of captain in the Fairfax County Police Department just outside DC, she retired as the commander of special investigations and forensics. During more than 2 decades on the force, her assignments included hostage negotiator, department spokesperson, and precinct commander. She uses her law enforcement background to bring a realistic edge to her writing, which includes the best-selling Sanchez and Heron series with Jeffrey Deaver, FBI Special Agent Nina Guerrera series, soon to be a Netflix feature film starring Jennifer Lopez, the award-winning Detective Veranda Cruz series, and the FBI Agent Daniela Vega series. Her books are published in 24 languages. Isabella's new novel, A Killer's Code, is the 3rd book in her Daniela Vega series, and it releases January 21st. And Lisa Gardner has this to say about Isabella's main character, Daniela. Dani Vega is the kick-ass heroine we've all been waiting for. Former Army Ranger, current hardcore FBI agent, she can outthink, outfight, and just plain outclass any opponent around. Isabella, welcome. And please tell us about A Killer's Code.
It's great. It's great to be here. A Killer's Code it's kind of interesting. It was almost like a fan favorite in a way. It's the 3rd in my series, and in the first book of the series, it's really not a spoiler because it's on the back jacket of the 3rd book, but a character died and everybody freaked out. And so my challenge was to find a realistic way to sort of experience him in a different way. And so I was able to come up with the idea of having him kind of like come back from beyond the grave with a video, a series of videos that would set the FBI on a cross-country hunt for all kinds of clues that he had set up. It was like an insurance policy that he did for himself in the event of his death. He wanted to make sure that everybody, he was going to bring down everyone around him who had been responsible for killing him. So it was like a dead man's switch. and it's set off.
I love that. I can't wait to hear more. Will you read to us?
Sure. As a matter of fact, what I'll do is I'll read the it's a short scene, and it's the scene where he is making the video that he sends to the director of the FBI. And so this is one of the last things he does before he dies, because he knows that one day it's coming. So he's in his apartment in Monaco when this scene takes place. His name is Gustavo Toro. Gustavo Toro settled into the black leather chair and focused on the camera's lens. He had taken the time to adjust it on a tripod. He didn't want a view of the ceiling or an odd angle that put half his face out of the frame. No, he wanted to do this only once, so he made sure everything was set up right. "If you're watching this, I'm dead," he began. "And others will be soon if you don't act fast." He paused to let that sink in. Having dealt with the FBI during his career, he understood that they would need a good reason to spend time, money, and resources on a case brought to them by a solution specialist, a term he'd come up with for what he did. He wasn't just a killer. After all, sometimes the problem person needed to remain alive after they were persuaded to cooperate. The Bureau was like a steam engine, though, and once they got going, they were an unstoppable force that would plow ahead until they reached their destination. He didn't like them, but he respected them in a way a diver respects a shark. "This video is for the director of the FBI," he continued. "And by now, you know who I am and what I do." He assumed the flash drive his attorney provided would end up on the director's desk, accompanied by a dossier. After all, he'd done his own research on the one who currently held the position, Thomas Franklin, and figured him for an all-business, no-bullshit kind of guy. Not fun to have a beer with, but exactly what the situation needed. He also learned Franklin was in his second year of a 10-year term of office. If Toro lived that long, he would have to evaluate the next director and adjust his plans if needed. But for now, Franklin was at bat. The camera's glowing red light brought him back to the task at hand. "I've got information to share with you, but you'll have to earn it." Part of his research had been to find the right bait for his hook, and Franklin seemed the type to rise to a challenge. What Toro was doing now was pure manipulation, but he was out of options. If he was dead, the FBI was his only shot. "In my line of work, you can't be too careful." He gave his head a small shake, aware of the irony of the situation. "The fact that you're watching this means I wasn't careful enough." For an instant, Toro wondered who would be the one to kill him. The list of possibilities was long, but at the top were Denton Foley and his boss, if they ever found out what he'd done to them. Toro had heard a few whispers that Foley was jealous of him, but he hadn't taken it seriously. Foley was the boss's top enforcer and most trusted employee, yet somehow he had come to view Toro as a threat. As he prepared to make a case for his unseen audience, he reflected that it wasn't Foley, but an entirely different set of circumstances that had prompted him to this desperate scheme. A totally unanticipated situation had thrown his life into chaos as it brought everything into sharp focus. And now his top priority was recruiting the FBI with bait they couldn't resist. To do that, he would have to bare his soul, admitting ugly truths about himself. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit to the end of the scene. He stared into the lens and for once allowed his emotions to show in his normally tightly controlled features. "Now that I'm dead, the clock has started ticking. Time's running out. If you're up for the challenge, click the button." For the 1,000th time, he reflected on his plans. There was a ton of risk, but he couldn't see a better way to go about it. A dead man's options were few.
Ooh, love it. Thank you, Isabella. I'm going to
Mhm.
come back and I've got more questions for you, but right now I'm going to circle back to Joseph. Joe, the protagonist of The Oligarch's Daughter, Paul Brightman's favorite drink is bourbon, specifically Four Roses. This may or may not be bourbon, but I'm going to, it is alcoholic. Yeah, everybody had like an alcoholic option for tonight, and I don't know if I would make it all the way through if I drank them all, which is usually the funnest part of this. Now, Joe, you majored in Russian studies at Yale University and received your master's from the Harvard Russian Research Center, and you were recruited to the CIA. So your earlier books, and I believe you had a nonfiction book. Do you want to tell us briefly about your nonfiction book? I think it was before your novels.
It was. My first book was a nonfiction book that was read by about 25 people. But it was about a guy named Dr. Armand Hammer, who was sort of known as the Kremlin's favorite capitalist. So that book was also sort of Russian themed as well.
Mm-hmm. And then your earlier books, The Moscow Club and Extraordinary Powers, were also Russian themed, about a KGB coup and then a Soviet mole in the CIA.
Right.
And
Right.
you are an expert on Russian spycraft. And I have so many questions about how one becomes an expert on that. But I'm just wondering right now, can you talk about returning to, because you've had other books on other topics, can you talk about returning to the subject of Russia with The Oligarch's Daughter? And this book takes place before the invasion of Ukraine, I believe, and what that's been like and how approaching this book has been different these years later.
Yeah, this book has two timelines. One takes place before the war in Ukraine, and one takes place in the present day. And while I started working on the book before the war in Ukraine, and it was about this oligarch and his wealth and his real estate and all of that in the US. And then the war happened, and all of a sudden everybody hated Russian oligarchs. They were sanctioned, almost all of them. And I thought, man, that's the end of this book. I've got to get rid of it. I've got to jettison it. And until it occurred to me that this could be very interesting if I set another scene during the war in the Ukraine, so that we had to get a sense of what it was like in the before times and what it's like today. And that made the book that much richer and fuller to me. So yeah, this was my my first time in writing about Russia in many books. I wanted something fresh to say. I didn't feel like writing the sort of book that was just anti-Russian or Russophobic. I wanted to do something. I wanted to tell a story that communicated how rich, in a different sort of way, Russian culture is and Russian families, so that our hero, Paul, not only falls in love with Tatiana, but he also falls in love with Tatiana's family, which is warm and bustling and different from the family that Paul grew up with. So I really wanted to sort of convey a different sense of Russia than I think is often read.
And you mentioned in your research Russian stuff and wilderness stuff. I wonder if you could give a little more detail about, I mean, you know so much about Russia and you're so much of an expert in this field. So could you talk a little bit more about what kind of new research or new learnings that writing this book entailed for you?
Well, I started with the question of, can you disappear today into the into sort of, can you sort of go off the grid? Is that possible? And it turns out it's really much more difficult than in the old days. A long time ago, there was a terrific thriller called The Day of the Jackal. And in it, the jackal copies down a name and birth date off a headstone of someone who's died in childhood, and then applies for this person's birth certificate and then gets a passport that way. You can't do that anymore. It doesn't work that way. So it's gotten much more complicated in the age of the internet, the age of web searches, Google, LinkedIn, all that. So I had to figure out how you could disappear, go off the grid. And it turned out one of the things you've got to do is you cannot have a bank account. You can't make interest, because once you have interest, the IRS tracks you down and they will figure out that you are not who you say you are. So that was one of the things I had to do research into. The other thing I had to do research into was what it was like to go through the woods of New Hampshire in cold weather. And in order to do this, I tracked down a couple of wilderness guides in New Hampshire who told me all kinds of ways that you can do it, you can get through, but you could still make mistakes, because my hero is kind of rusty at this. My hero has learned basics from his father, who learned a lot of basics about how to disappear. His father is sort of a strange character. The two of them are estranged. So there's a lot that I had to come up with in terms of the research. And Tosca, you know how this is. The research can be some of the most fun you have in writing a book like this.
Mm-hmm. So if you go missing, Joe, we'll know that you've taken the research to the next level then.
That's right.
Okay. Is there a fun secret or a bit of an unknown background that you could share about this book?
You know, I can't think of something right off the top of my head.
Okay.
If I come up with something by the end, I'll raise my hand.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Well, we're going to circle back because I'm not done. But right now I'm going to move on to Melissa. Melissa's favorite drink is sparkling lemonade.
I'm keeping you sober tonight, Tosca.
Thank you for that. Oh, no, that's the wrong one. Wait, this one. Sorry.
I was
Already
gonna say
kicking
that
in.
didn't look sober.
Yeah. I opted for this one because I
Cheers.
studied at Oxford one summer and had too many gin and tonics. So this one. Okay. But one of her main characters does like a good gin and tonic. Okay, Melissa, you grew up in a family of writers and you were the odd one out at first for not writing, but then something happened. What was it that happened? Can you tell us about the journey to Shutter and now to The Lost House?
I like to joke that I kind of like slipped on a banana peel and like fell into it. Like, I grew up my father is a writer, my mom is a poet, my older brother writes screenplays, and I just was like, well, I just like books, I just like reading, and so I thought that I would go into publishing. And in NYU, there was a class that was called Editing the Manuscript with an executive editor from Macmillan. And I thought, that's perfect. I'll learn how to edit. And the first day of class, she said, normally I don't accept anyone into this class who hasn't written a full manuscript, but this time I'll just accept 60 pages. And I had like a 3-hour panic attack. I don't remember the rest of that class because I just started thinking, oh my God, I have to write 60 pages of a novel. I didn't think about leaving the class. I just suddenly went home and started writing in a panic, and I loved it. It became like my secret little project. So for
Slippery
years,
slope.
Yeah, it was very slippery slope. Like the first taste, it was amazing. I remember that first paragraph writing it and just thinking, wow, I'm like, this is magic. And uh, I ended up working in publishing, so it was something that I did kind of on the side as a secret thing. And then finally, I worked up the courage to go to my MFA and really try. And I told myself, I'm giving up a career, so I have to really write a book and sell it and figure this out. And became like the Terminator in classes and sold the book 2 months before graduation. So I went
Wow.
very hard into writing.
Wow. Wow. So
Yeah.
when you sold your first book, how old were you?
I was 20. I should know that off the top of my head. I think I was 27. Sorry.
Wow. Wow.
I was young.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Now, the Lost House
Yeah.
takes place in Iceland in the winter. Now, I've visited Iceland, and I think most of us who visit go in the summer. So, can you tell us about researching this novel and about Iceland in the winter?
Yeah, I love Iceland. I've been there many times now, and it's this will be my first year coming up where I actually go in the summer. I've only been there in the winter. I went there for the first time 10 years ago with friends because they wanted to see the Northern Lights, and we went for about a week and saw the Northern Lights. It was this incredible, magical experience, and I remember thinking to myself, like, you need to come back here when you need it. Like, this is special. And my first book came out, Shadow came out in 2021, and I couldn't write. I was having so much trouble that it was finally like, okay, it's time to go to Iceland. And so I went for a 2-week holiday to kind of shake things loose. And then I ended up staying for 3 months, as long as my visa would allow me, because I was writing what became The Lost House. And the winter is very cold and dark and magical, and it makes you believe in all of their stories of, elves and trolls and hidden people. And although there is the added benefit of it snows and rains and ices over so often that during this time I slipped on ice and tore my knee and had to get surgery. So
Okay, that's
you
not
also have to be
the
careful
fun
in
part.
Iceland. Yeah,
Wow, what an adventure. Is
it's really
there
fun.
kind of a fun, like an unknown background secret or fun bit of trivia about this book you could share with us?
Well, okay, I have two things. One is there's a very silly Easter egg in it just for me, which is a SpongeBob reference that I no one has yet found. So if you find it, tell me. But the other thing is, so I had knee surgery while I was revising the book, and I went to my first checkup with the surgeon, and he asked, how are you doing? What's going on? And I said, it's fine, good. And then he was getting ready to leave. It was just a 5-minute check-in, and I said, wait, what if, and I explained what my character had gone through, what would happen? And he sat down and we ended up talking for 45 minutes while he showed me different anatomy things. So he ended up having a lot of meetings with my doctor that were supposedly for my knee, but were for Agnes's knee.
Wow. Very, very cool. Thank you for sharing that. And I am going to circle back, but right now I'm going to move on to Jacob. Jacob's main character, Mackenzie, enjoys white wine, like he read from the excerpt, any kind that doesn't come in a box. And
She'll take it from a box too, if it comes
oh,
down to it.
oh, now you told me. Okay.
No, it's okay.
This may or may not be white wine. Okay. Jacob, this is your debut.
Yes.
What's been the biggest surprise about this journey so far?
I mean, everything's been a surprise, I think. Just the transition from, this was an idea I had sort of rattling around in my head for many, many years, and then, took some time to get it out onto the page, and just every piece of the transition from it being a figment of my imagination to now something that I'm talking about on a Zoom call with strangers. It's all very all very new and you know, overwhelming in some ways, but also really gratifying. And I can see why, you know, to Melissa's example, why it can be this kind of intoxicating, addictive feeling. And yeah, so really every piece of it has been a surprise.
You were one of the first employees of Airbnb, and you're an attorney, and you've had a
Yeah,
lot of interesting
don't hold
jobs.
don't hold it against me. Yeah.
We know a lot of attorney authors.
Yeah.
Who write wonderful books. You've had a lot of
Thanks.
interesting jobs, including bartender, sports writer, and for one disastrous afternoon, the driver of an ice cream truck. And I am just dying to hear this story.
Yeah, it was I was 19 years old. It was the summer after my freshman year of college. Um, I like to tell people that was the stupidest I ever was. That was like my peak stupidity was that year. And as one of many stupid decisions that year, I decided driving around in an ice cream truck for the summer sounded like a great job. And I lasted 4 hours. Basically, the truck broke down constantly. All the kids wanted were the SpongeBob bars, and so I sold out of those really fast, and then couldn't nobody wanted anything else. I just had a bunch of angry kids storming the gates of my car, of my truck, furious that I was out of SpongeBob. Um, and a bunch of very miffed parents that, you know, I didn't stock more SpongeBob. And yeah, my shift was supposed to be longer, and it was also a thing where you had to sort of pay the company, you had to pay the company up front for the right to rent the truck, and then you got to make like what you actually sold. So I ended up losing money out of that job.
Oh, no.
And yeah, dropped off the truck and ran away and never went back.
Sounds mildly traumatic.
Yeah.
Is there a fun secret or bit of unknown background about this book that you would like to share with us?
Sure. Just some unknown background, I guess. Writing the entire book was kind of an out-of-body experience because I started writing it when my wife and I had two boys, both under the age of 2. So when I started writing, we had a 22-month-old and a 6-month-old. So yeah, I don't, you know, I was just sort of trying to find time to write in between naps and diaper changes and just, you know, little 20-minute increments wherever I could. And, you know, in some ways that was really challenging, and made it more difficult, but I'm also very grateful for it because doing it that way, I was never able to get stuck in my own head. I just, you know, I only had limited windows in which to write, and I had, you know, these two little human beings who were demanding tons of my time and attention, and you know, it prevented me from ever getting too deep into a well of my own psyche. So sort of a double-edged sword there, but a very unique experience.
All right. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. I'm going to go on to Isabella. Isabella's main character, Danny Vega, is a former Army Ranger turned FBI agent and still occasionally likes to indulge in treats from her days in the military. She used to stash Caribbean flavored beef jerky in her rucksack whenever she could. And for a beverage, we do have a recipe for the Army Ranger cocktail on the Rogue Women Writers Rogue Reads website. So if you want to try that one out, go check out the recipe. Isabella also co-authors a series with Jeffrey Deaver. So Isabella, you began writing after retiring as a police captain, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Could you talk about that transition, and were you thinking about writing beforehand? And can you talk about how that transition happened?
Yeah, I always knew I wanted to write. I ended up going into law enforcement instead, and you know, rising up through the ranks and becoming a captain was amazing. My last position when I retired, I was the commander of special investigations and forensics. So I thought to myself, well, you know, I know just enough to be dangerous. I can, you know, maybe use some of this in my writing. And I also noticed I think a lot of it's kind of people seem to enjoy in all kinds of fiction a female law enforcement, you know, person. And I thought, well, I think maybe I can lend some authenticity to that. So let me step into that and, see if I can bring something to the table. And it's been very well received, and people really do seem to be enjoying it quite a bit.
Mhm. Is there a fun secret or a bit of unknown background about this new book that you could share with us?
Absolutely. So it's called A Killer's Code. My main character, not only was she a former Army Ranger, but when she was in the military, she'd been trained in cryptography, and I explain all that. So there's a lot of like code breaking and stuff, and I had to study code breaking. As a matter of
Oh,
fact,
wow.
here is, I'll hold this up. This is a really old-fashioned cipher. This is like,
Oh, wow.
this is old school.
Wow.
And so, a lot of cryptanalysis is done these days, using supercomputers and stuff, but I needed to be old school. So I had to create my own like puzzles, codes, and riddles, but make them so that they're, analog, so the reader can solve them. And I absolutely set it all up so that if the reader wants to, they can totally crack the code, because I don't reveal the answer until, the next page or two later, but I do tell you what the answer is and all that. And the readers they love that. They think it's so much fun to try to crack the code and solve the riddles and stuff like that. And then the other sort of behind the scenes thing, aside from having to learn how to do that, is I can write about law enforcement. I can write about forensics and police procedure, and very familiar with the FBI, so I can make a good FBI agent. But I had never been an Army Ranger or in the military. So the other thing is I had to get this. This is actually, yes,
I love it.
I had to read this, and these, look at my notes. This is produced by the U.S. Army. This is their Ranger handbook.
Wow.
That the publisher is the government. This is what they do. And so I had to literally go through here because I'm obsessed with accuracy. And I'm like, if I'm going to write about a Ranger, and then in addition to that, I was listening to like podcasts featuring Rangers, and I read several books written by Rangers about what they did and stuff like that. At first, I'm so amazed and impressed with the Rangers. They are incredible. And but to make it believable and accurate, it's like doing a deep dive on different things. All authors seems like we love research, and I'm no different. But the research that I did was it was a lot of fun for me.
That book is amazing. I had no idea such a book existed. What an incredible resource to have. My last question for you is, because you also co-author with Jeffrey Deaver, who is a well-known outliner, right? Extensive outliner, I believe. So my question to you is, do you outline when you write your solo novels?
Yeah, when I talk about Jeff, I say that he is a world-class outliner. He takes it to a new level. And he will write 100-page outline, maybe more. I do outline, but my outlines are like 15 pages. I'm just sort of getting the broad strokes of where I want to go. And but one thing I did discover is, and I think that Jeff and I both, when we appear together, we talk about this. People who don't like to outline, you shouldn't be afraid of it, because we both deviate from the outline. It is not chiseled in stone. We absolutely, in every case, we have had to make major changes, and he says he does that all the time. It's just, I think it's a way to sort of get going, get you into the story. You kind of know where you're going to be, but good Lord, we're totally free about, doing lots of revisions.
All right, well, thank you. I have so many more questions I want to ask, but I want to make sure that I touch upon any questions from our attendees. So if you have a question, would you please be sure and throw that up in the chat. And in the meantime, I'm going to quickly ask one that I've been dying to ask this group. And I'm going to go backwards. Isabella, I'm going to start with you. I'd like to know, what is either a most memorable favorite moment of your career to date in writing, or what is it about this writing life that means the most to you personally?
one of the things that was most memorable to me was when I got feedback when my book started selling internationally, and there were some posts from some young women on Instagram. They were a bookstagrammer, and they were in Ukraine right when the war started a couple of years back. And they were putting my books in Ukrainian. They were like posting about them and stuff. And the character I was writing about at that time was very inspirational to them. And the publisher had to shut down most of their publishing, but mine was one of the few series. They went ahead and published all of it because the people found it inspirational, and they were, and just the idea that you write fiction and it is meant to be fiction, but that real people experiencing real trauma in a real situation got inspiration from that. That is, I mean, that's like made my heart happy.
Mhm. Thank you. All right, real quickly, round robin, because Chris says we do have some Facebook questions, so I'm going to go real fast to Jacob. Jacob, what's been and I know that this is your debut, so what's been a most memorable moment so far on this crazy journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the memorable moments is just my main character is a woman, and she's, designed to be sort of this insider outsider, um, navigating this world of obnoxious tech bros. And so for that reason, I thought it was very important that she be a female lead protagonist. But I had, some trepidation about trying that because obviously I'm not the ideal voice to be writing that. So when I first got initial feedback from my wife and my mom and my sister that they felt like she was this really strong, really admirable protagonist, and they loved everything about her, that was a really great first moment for me.
Mhm. Thank you. Melissa?
So Shudder, my debut came out in 2021. There was a pandemic happening. So a lot of it felt like it had kind of come out and I didn't really get to talk to readers. And then last year at Iceland Noir, this incredible literary festival, this I was on a panel with these incredible, like very prolific authors, and at the end of the panel, this woman approached the table and she had brought Shudder all the way from Colorado to Iceland because she knew I
Wow.
was going to be there, and she
Wow.
wanted me to sign it, and it was just we now email. I love her very much. It's very
Very
memorable.
cool. Very cool. Joe, a most memorable moment or something that means the most to you personally about this career?
Well, a memorable moment was I was in the movie High Crimes had a cameo, and one of the actors was Morgan Freeman, and I just thought to myself, I've got to meet him, but I've been told to stay away from the actors. So I kind of snuck around, and I went up to him and I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Freeman, I just wanted to say hi. My name is Joseph Finder. I wrote the book the movie's based on." And he kind of turned to the guy standing next to him and said, "So this gentleman here says he wrote the book the movie's based on, like I give a shit." And I just thought, oh my God, Morgan Freeman? And then he I got you, didn't I?
Oh my gosh. I would have, oh,
It was yeah, it was a great memorable moment anyway.
wow. Wow. Okay, Chris, you said some Facebook questions. Do you want to let us know what they are in our last few minutes here?
Sure. We have, well, I'll just run them down for all the authors. The questions are, how did you get started writing? And some of you have kind of answered this, but how did you end up choosing this genre? I mean, clearly you all chose the crime genre. Is there something about it that you find compelling to write in this genre?
All right, speed round style. Shall we go Isabella again?
Yeah, I mean, I think mine's the most obvious, 22 years, crime. Yeah, it was a natural. That's it.
Check. Okay. Joe?
It's what I loved reading in college and afterward. I just sort of found myself reading mysteries and thrillers and deciding this is what I wanted to do.
Mhm. Jacob?
Yeah, same answer as Joe. It's what I grew up reading. And then, at some point during my time in tech, I realized there was a nice juxtaposition there of you have this very optimistic, sunny place with all these big ideas and bright logos and glass walls. And then you also have this underbelly of ambition and greed and billions of dollars at stake. And it just felt like a really rich territory for this kind of story.
Mhm. Melissa?
I agree. I grew up inhaling this stuff, and I think it just came naturally. Like, I tried to write a romance novel. I'm friends with a lot of romance novelists, and it seems very nice. And I got 2 paragraphs in, and I was like, this is so hard. So I just prefer the existential angst of thrillers.
Chris, do we have another one?
Yeah, okay, so Joe, somebody wanted to know how you chose, why you were so interested in Russia when you were younger, and that you went into Russian studies into school. But also, I want to know, is there a reason you switched from writing the Nick Heller series to standalones? Was that conscious choice to abandon a series character?
Well, I don't feel like I abandoned Nick. I was writing standalones. I wrote a couple of Nicks. I wrote another standalone. I went back to Nick. The thing is, I would come up with ideas for standalones that did not work as series premises. And so I think mostly it's because of the ideas that came to me.
So now the rest of you write, well, you have a debut novel. Are you going to write a series, Melissa, Jacob? Are you going to write a series? I mean, are you, or you think you're more standalone oriented?
I've been asked to by my grandfather to write a sequel to Shutter. I think for The Lost House, there's a character in it who I love, and I love her story, so I might leapfrog to her, but I don't think I could do a series yet. I think I'm very intensely like in love with just standalones.
I think I could definitely form it into a series, but just sort of TBD, remains to be seen.
Okay. Isabella, how did you get a copy of the Rangers official book? Did you have to apply for,
It seems like, I'd had to jump through a lot of hoops or something,
And
but no,
infiltrate
it's like,
someplace.
it's totally available online. You can order it.
you just ordered it?
It's
Okay.
available. Yeah, the government publishing office will just like send it out to you. I don't know why, but they do.
Great. Okay, and so the last 2 questions are how did you find your characters, or did the characters find you? I mean, did you have a plot and then you needed characters that could work with that plot, or did you actually come up with the characters in a situation and that's what formed your book? And how much research do all of you normally do?
Ooh. Hey, who wants to take that one first?
Oh God, I can't take silence. So, um, I'm a character first. Both Shutter and The Lost House are kind of psychological first, and I think Agnes, my main character for this one, she really came alive as I was figuring out, I knew there was this backstory of the grandfather. I knew there was something about her and this idea of what if the person who raised you was a monster, but she really came forward first. I do think it's very funny the difference in reactions to these 2 characters. So my first novel, Shutter, is told in first person, and the main character, Betty, is this very insecure, troubled person, and people hated her. People are so angry at her throughout the book. And then with this, The Lost House, I thought, well, if they're going to hate her, I'm just going to make her more intense and angrier and prickly. And people now really like her. All the comments are like, I'm really rooting for her. And I was like, well, but she's so much more of a bitch than the first one. So I think character first.
Jacob, now I'm going to call on people, so Melissa's not uncomfortable. So Jacob.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Yeah, Dead Money has a lot of twists in it. It's a very sort of multi-layered plot, but one of the things I actually discovered sort of the hard way while writing it was that I couldn't start with all the twists. I needed to start with a character and then go from there. Otherwise, the twists and the reveals just feel a little bit hollow, right? You need the characters to sort of be the guiding light. And for me, when I'm developing characters, you know, I always just have to kind of start. Well, I mean, let's be clear, it's my debut, so I haven't developed that many in my career so far compared to some of the other folks on this call. But I try to start with a part of myself. It doesn't always have to be a huge part. It can be. It can be like a worldview or a philosophy, but it can also just be a central impulse, like an impulse or some sort of feeling that I had years ago in a certain situation. I try to tap into that and then build out from there and sort of use that as like the roots of the tree or the seed and then watch it grow.
Thank you. All right, Joe?
Yep. Well, I started with a premise, which is this idea of a guy going off the grid, disappearing. But I wanted to figure out who he had to be and why was he going off the grid? Why did he have to disappear? And so I began to sort of build up his backstory that way. I also wanted to figure out who he could be in this off-the-grid life that he lives in this small town of New Hampshire. What could he do? So I made him a boat builder. And then I thought, well, so how did he become a boat builder? Where did that come from? And the character began to sort of grow that way.
Okay, thank you. Isabella.
Yeah, well, so I've got like 4 series. So I'm, sort of familiar with the idea of like creating the thing. And in a way, like, I think like Joe, it's like I start with the idea of a premise, and I know that it's going to be more than one book to begin with. But on the same hand, I also always have an idea of a character arc that will last over more than one book. I know, and I do a steep character arc because I do like a closed series. There are trilogies at this point, but so I can do a really steep rather than a flat character arc. So I can make my character change dramatically from book 1 to book 3. And that's the best because then you're on a journey. But as you know, the famous saying goes, plot reveals character. So that is exactly how I do it. I just like put the screws to them in the biggest pressure cooker. And that really is what I think brings out those aspects of their character, is the hair-raising, edge of your seat, high octane plot where the stakes are as high as they can be. Because like in real life, it's all about your choices. How you react under pressure shows who you are.
All right, thank you. Chris, do we have any more? Are we good? We're good? Okay, okay.
We're good. Sorry, I'm muted. Yeah.
No,
we're
that's
good.
all right. That's all right. Well, thank you for the excellent questions. And I just want to thank our group of authors tonight. Thank you, Joseph Fender. Thank you, Melissa Larsen, Jacob Kerr, and Isabella Maldonado. I always love emceeing these because it's so fun and inspiring and also very entertaining. There's always a fun story behind these stories. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you also for reading, because it's kind of I feel like it's a lost art. We don't always get to hear the authors read from their own work, which is something I think we all enjoy so much. And I just want to remind everybody on Facebook and on YouTube and also here on Zoom that each of these books is available anywhere books are sold, and that we hope you will go pick up a copy. Now that you've met the authors personally, please support also your independent local bookstore. We have 4 winners who are going to be notified via email, so please be sure you check your email because we want to make sure you get your prize. And I also hope that you'll be joining us at our next Rogue Reads next month for another stellar lineup. We've got Cody Doctorow, Joshua Moling, Lisa Unger, and Kelly Armstrong, and our own Isabella Maldonado, who joined us tonight, is going to be in the MC chair next month. So it's going to be really fun with more entertaining stories and wonderful work that is being shared with you right as or before it even comes out. So thank you very much to our guests, and thank you everybody who joined us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. It was so nice to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Thank you all
everyone.
so much.